Scorpio and the 8th house. Let's start drawing in consensus, individuated, spirituated. Let's start bringing in any keywords, concepts that we haven't talked about yet. Who's got things popping in their head they want to know about? Gabriella?
In consensus, I would say it's someone who definitely looks for getting a power position somewhere. Could be also in the clergy, maybe something.
You could see that, yeah. You could, when you're looking at the Scorpio 8th archetype and consensus, you either have someone who is in the extremes of having to be in power and control, or you can also have someone who feels powerless and looking for the source of power outside of themselves. And so when you start to work with this archetype of the dual desires and the human-made distortions, what you can also find with Scorpio in the 8th house is all of the sadomasochistic distortions, especially when you start looking at that through the archetype of sexuality. So, any of us who've taken classes from Jeffrey or who have read Pluto Volume 2 know some of the extremes that you can go into. Also, the hint for homework. When I started working with the correspondence course for Jeffrey, I deliberately chose to keep his same homework because that homework helps you grow. Because the homework examples are intense extremes of those archetypes. And the majority of us in our little metaphysical worlds and the majority of people that we have a tendency to attract in, we don't always attract in those samples. And yet in the spectrum of really becoming healthy, efficient, broad evolutionary astrologers, we need to know that. We need to know the Scorpio extremes so that we can learn to recognize that, so we can point it out, and it helps us grow. The worst thing you want to do is all those Libra projections of everybody's love and light ideals. That's why this is really where the Scorpio 8th house archetype, you have got to do the observation correlation thing. Those consensus, extremes that we could find, again, can show us those very ugly sexual distortions in Maria.
Wouldn't, though, like a consensus Scorpio be pretty good at masking?
Yes, the secrecy, the hiding, the manipulations, the control. And again, because Scorpio has that archetype to penetrate to the core of the soul, this is that hypnotic attraction. This is the moth to the flame that gets going with that archetype. This is why these souls, let's just say, again, as we talked before, it's not just Lucifer that shows us the dual desires of the soul or the dual forces. It's also the Scorpio 8th house Pluto. And so you look at that consensus stuff and you look at some of the distortions. With this archetype, you can see some of the worst influences of evil. And that those very same archetypes then also show you some of the best examples of people teaching, the truth. But consensus, we will have a tendency, because again, due to the distortions upon the planet today, consensus Scorpio will really be trying to grasp that outer power to feel secure. So all of the not so nice, all of the ugly Scorpio words really get manifested. Steve?
The way I put that is, they want to merge with the other person to take their power into themselves.
Yes, there we go.
Versus in the higher states, having a mutual exchange of the energies.
And in the higher states, teaching others to be empowered. Yeah. The consensus Scorpio 8th archetype wants to take someone else's power. Use people. Manipulation.
Because the underlying thing is that feeling of limits. So if they feel that if they're taking, they don't understand that the energy just flows. It's like either you have it or I have it, and if I have it, you don't have it.
Good.
No, they're power game. That's power. It's power balance.
Right.
Is it
Barb?
is it kind of analogous to either or versus a both and kind of thinking?
Yes. Yes, that's Scorpio's tendency until it starts to evolve.
So consensus, you might find politicians.
You can find politicians anywhere. You can find politicians in Sag, in the Capricorn archetypes. With the Scorpio archetype, you're, especially like let's just say third house consensus, you're going to find that in all avenues. You can have the CEO of a company who has mega income, hundreds of millions of dollars, while everybody else works for minimum wage in his organization, her organization, don't limit it. Yeah, not just politicians, anybody who wants to have, remember that consensus state, society, wants to run it. The Scorpio archetype wants to be in control. Many times the financial control, okay? So you can see how all of those financial archetypes work through this, via this Taurus-Scorpio polarity, and the whole resources thing. This is how Scorpio got to be called taxes, the control. Taxes and death, yes. We saw that. What about the individuated consciousness working with the Scorpio 8th house archetypes?
There's a man that I know who's an artist who now passed, is dead, and he was born with cystic fibrosis, and he had a very heavy, his whole practice was his sadomasochistic relationship to his body. But what's so weird about it, and I've always had this really strange complexity with him, is that, and he had a S&M, personal relationship too, that they both talked about immensely, but he lived longer than anybody with cystic fibrosis because of his profoundly complex relationship to the pain in his body. And it's really interesting. I would certainly put Bob into Individuated. I don't even know if he was a Scorpio, but the world he lived in, especially in relationship with his physical pain. I mean, he'd take nails and stick them into his peenie, the whole bit. But he lived longer than anybody else with that disease. Because he worked with the suffering and the pain so deeply. It was really
Attached to it.
intense. Yeah.
Attached to it. We can also see the individuated Scorpio 8th archetype with the insecurity. Like, can you imagine that beginning individuated? They don't have the courage to do the second house Taurus self-reliance thing. So latching on to others for a source of security almost starts to flip if you look at it going from consensus to individuated. Again, it's not an absolute though, but you can see because of that Scorpio archetype of looking for a greater source of power because of its own limitations in that individuated state. This would be, beginning individuated, you could see the insecurities. Second stage individuated, the insecurities are still there, but as that starts to get into that rebellion, then there's that control to latch on again. First stage individuated would do the control being the victim. I need you to take care of me. Second stage individuated, could you then see it flip-flop? Let me take care of you so that I feel secure. Yeah, another thing that happens with this archetype of Scorpio in the 8th and Pluto is that there needs to be an application of willpower because of this deep need to be secure. We can know better. And yet again, due to this dual archetype and the separating forces, there can be this undermining with Scorpio. I know better. I know I shouldn't be in relationship with this type of a person, and yet I compulsively find myself going there. You must have a consistent application of willpower with that Scorpio archetype. Other individuated examples? Maybe?
Kimberly, really quickly, if you could go over the idea of willpower again? Meaning that the Scorpio needs willpower?
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't
Yes.
self-indulge, I suppose.
Yes.
Okay. Has willpower, that's what it would be.
Judy?
Just a comment, I have a good friend who has a tremendous amount of Scorpio energy in her chart, and she has eating problems and other problems as well, but she has shared that for her, the use of willpower is so critical, because if she gives in one time, she's totally hooked. Her whole behavior goes down the tube. She can't pull herself back up. I mean, it takes her to get, she has to go way
She has
back
to go to the extreme
go to the
before
ex-
she can come back.
before she can come back. But once she starts using self-control and discipline, I mean, I've seen her where her weight has gone way down and she's really in a totally different place. And she said it's just amazing, because she's watched herself. And she only needs to deviate once, and she's hooked, which I find very fascinating.
Yep, that's running into that whole archetype. Is there Virgo or 6th in the chart?
Yes, her sun, North Node, both in Virgo.
That also starts to move in with that Scorpio archetype,
Yeah,
okay? And the Virgo judgments get in the way,
right.
and that keeps that spiraling into the extreme. And so if she could learn to understand some of the healthy Virgo 6th archetype, she could have the willpower to stop before she gets to that extreme. But the host sadomasochistic judgment starts in with Virgo in the 6th, and it takes that Scorpio and yeah. Other is spirituated. So what do we see with the major Scorpio 8th and it's spirituated? Do we have a J with G? That's a term we've created at the house. Gabriella?
I think they could be maybe also great therapists, because
Yes,
they
good
can
one.
be so deep.
Good one. There we go. The natural psychologist that turns into a really good therapist, because they can just osmosis themselves into wherever the client or student or person across the table with them is at, and understand them where they're at. Now you see how this relates to evolutionary astrology, so that they can help that client where they're at.
And also know they're not going to get stuck there. Because I think a lot of times why people like this whole idea of willpower is the idea of people being terrified of going into someone else's space because they don't want to be infected by it. You know, it's true. I think a lot of people do think that on an unconscious level, or they don't feel like they're so scared they're going to get sucked into somebody else's problem. The idea of willpower has to focus to keep that kind of control. But the capacity to go into hell and be able to going into hell is easy, getting out of it is hard.
It's kind of like, when you can learn to start to discern healthy Scorpio energy, it's an ability to understand somebody being in their mess and holding the energy to help them by just osmosising back to the Scorpio person, being able to grasp a greater willpower. So it's not always just the Scorpio energy having the willpower. Again, it's a healthy Scorpio empowers others. And so that healthy Scorpio can help others understand how to obtain their own willpower, their own metamorphosis, their own abilities to change. Say, Annie.
You're getting more into sacred sexual practices.
Oh, good one. There we go. There we go. The concept of soulmates belongs to Scorpio in the 8th house archetype. It was as Steve was talking earlier, there's the deep merging. And when you look at it, that desire to return to source, what is that? It's merging with source. And when, you know, I don't know the language, but we all know that orgasm is little death. You know, we move outside of ourselves, we merge with greater power, and we do it through sexuality. Now, can you see where sexuality gets to be the most sacred act there is? Can you see how empowering sexuality is? We move beyond ourselves when we merge with another, and this is how we are doing it on the physical levels. So your human-made distortions have taken one of the very tools that are empowering for us in our growth as human beings, and they've bastardized it. And so this is one of the greatest works of evolutionary astrology. This is why Jeffrey did not shy away from that subject and expose the distortions of it and label them for what they are. The distortions that have come via these human-made religions. But sacred sex and soulmates and getting into the sacred act of sexuality, and what we can find through Scorpio and the 8th, via the polarity with Taurus in the 2nd, is again being able to do the tantric work, the breath work, being able to do it within yourself, and then do it with another. It's just, remember these sayings we've been using? You can only love someone else to the degree that you can love yourself. Your capacity for sexual satisfaction with another comes from your sexual satisfaction with yourself. So the ancient tantras start with self, and then on to another. This is taking Scorpio into its higher sacred realms. So look at these extremes that Scorpio has. Gabriella.
Yeah, they can live very extreme, and as they want to know the deepest point of everything, they can get into dangerous situations as well. And they see that they survive it again and again, so that they develop a quite big fearlessness. Because they know that they survive it again and again.
Good one. Very, very good one. Yep. Those encounters, you know, we hear, we've heard Jeffrey, you know, tell the stories because of these dual desires and the dual forces and how they exist within the Scorpio 8th house polarity. There is this need, and you know, and sometimes fascination to go discover that dark side. Taboos belong in Scorpio. And so it's always, remember, it's about taking these two polarities and being able to balance them to go to that next plateau. And then there's two polarities to balance the next plateau. And so it's just, you know, going on and on like that.
Would the theme integrate one's shadow be also mainly Scorpio?
Yes, shadow would be another word for, in evolutionary astrology, we call the separating desires the separating forces. Steve?
There's a piece we haven't really discussed, which is, to me, as I've reflected on it, there is in life, or natural law, outside of astrology, what you call a death rebirth principle in life. Everything
go.
dies, is reborn. And then this is what Scorpio symbolizes. And Jeffrey calls this process metamorphosis and distinguishes it from transformation, because something completely new comes out of it. And his example is caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, because no one could predict a butterfly coming from a caterpillar.
Yep, exactly. That's where the traditional astrology has Scorpio also as the symbol of the phoenix rising from the ashes. That's that metamorphic process
I'm
too. Go ahead.
I'm just really aware lately in my own process is how much I need to regenerate. Like all that Scorpio energy in me, regeneration is so important to me on an emotional level. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I need to go down and as vast as possible, and then it changes. I rejuvenate. I
Yep.
really rejuvenate.
Yep.
Deep
Yep.
emotional. And not everyone's that way. I have a lot of friends who just like, you have to talk about how different everybody is.
Yep.
I'm very aware of that.
Yep. One of another little word that I will use with Scorpio sometimes is it's the recycler of the zodiac. It takes what everybody else wants to discard and it recycles it into something else. That's very useful. That's why my little saying is the Pluto and Scorpio generation is going to grow up and destroy us or save us. So, this is this is a little bit of both. And so when we look at this Pluto and Scorpio generation, remember I told you I had a background for several years in environmental politics. And one of the things I did was I led an organization that kept the major East Coast cities from creating garbage dumps in the southern hills because of our soil and rock formations. And so I look at this Pluto and Scorpio generation growing up, and another archetype that will come with Scorpio from all of this metamorphic process is that these are the scientists and the inventors and the doctors, healers. And so I look at this generation, they're going to do things with recycling these resources on the planet that are going to amaze us. And so to me, I choose to hold out the hope with some of this global warming stuff that's going on, that this little Pluto and Scorpio generation, the earliest ones are young adults now, that, Greg?
I was just going to say, my daughter's in the highest level of mathematics and chemistry at UC Berkeley right now. She's Pluto and Scorpio, South Node Scorpio.
Yep, there we go. There we go. And so we're going to watch this generation come along and just blow us away with the metamorphosis. There are those who will be, again, we'll see the extremes of this generation all over the place. And so we may, see the negative charismatic healers out of the Pluto and Scorpio generation. We'll also see some very beautiful examples of healers and teachers out of this Pluto and Scorpio generation. Carmen, you had something?
I think one of the symbols of the highest expression of this